Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today. We are going to put on our sociology professor hats for a bit to unpack a really fascinating evolution in our society. We're looking at how and why the traditional definitions of marriage and family are fundamentally shifting literally right before our eyes. And we're going to rely strictly on the academic data to understand the reality of how we live, how we love, and how we build our households today.
Okay, let's just dive right into the syllabus. We've got 5 main topics on the docket today: the singles phenomenon, cohabitation typologies, cohabitation versus marriage, child outcomes, and finally, same-sex families.
Starting off with Section 1, the singles phenomenon. Now, for a long time in the United States, marriage was just considered the automatic default for adulthood. But get this, the data shows us that almost half, 49% of all U.S. residents 18 and older are unmarried. That is a staggering 112.8 million people. It's definitely not just a blip in the radar. It's the result of several persistent factors. People are delaying marriage longer than ever, divorce rates remain pretty persistent, and crucially, there are vastly expanded educational and employment options for women, which really reduces the pure economic necessity of marriage.
But here's the kicker. Even with half the adult population flying solo, society hasn't completely caught up. Sociologists use 2 really fascinating terms to describe this friction: singleism and matrimonia. Singleism is essentially the discriminatory treatment and negative stereotyping of unmarried folks. And this works right in tandem with matrimonia, which is the societal glorification of couples, basically elevating marriage to this absolute, unquestionable ideal.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the hard data just completely shatters these myths of singleism. Society often assumes singles are just sitting around lonely, self-centered, or desperately waiting to be coupled up. Actually, scratch that. The research shows that never-married singles are incredibly independent, highly resourceful, and on several well-being measures, they actually fare better than divorced singles. They are actively choosing this lifestyle and thriving in it.
Moving on to Part 2, unpacking cohabitation typologies.
So what happens when people partner up but intentionally bypass the altar? Well, over the last 40 years, we've seen a massive 20-fold boom in cohabitation. But living together isn't just one monolithic thing. It's a highly complex spectrum of intentions. It might be a trial marriage, where partners are actively assessing if they're compatible. It could be a precursor to marriage for engaged couples. Some use it strictly as a substitute for marriage, with absolutely zero intention of tying the knot, while others view it as co-residential dating, which is basically a serious boyfriend-girlfriend dynamic where you just happen to share a roof.
It's also super important to note that economic and cultural factors heavily influence these typologies. For instance, the data indicates that for African American and Hispanic populations, cohabitation is more frequently utilized as a long-term substitute for marriage rather than just a quick trial run. For Hispanic communities in particular, this concept of consensual unions ties back to very deep historical roots in Latin American cultural values.
All right, Section 3, cohabitation versus marriage.
If cohabitation is so prevalent now, how does it actually stack up against marriage academically? Let's put them side by side. First up, commitment. Marriage is heavily institutionalized, right? It's locked in by legal, social, and cultural frameworks. Cohabitation, on the other hand, generally has a more transitory commitment. Interestingly, unmarried couples are way less likely than married ones to get pushed by their friends and family to make those really hard personal sacrifices to save a struggling relationship.
What about the money? When cohabiting couples first move in together, they get this economic premium. Rent is halved, utilities are shared. It's great. But long-term, their economic situations are actually significantly more precarious. They rarely pull their money into shared accounts, and the data tells us that when financial conflicts do happen, they are far more likely to lead to a complete breakup compared to married couples.
Then there's intimacy and exclusivity, and the academic findings here are pretty fascinating. Observing the data impartially, heterosexual cohabitants actually report having sex more frequently than married couples. But marriage provides a different benefit: far greater exclusivity. Statistically speaking, cohabitants just experience a higher likelihood of infidelity than those who are married.
Which brings us to Section 4, stability in child outcomes.
We are now at what is arguably the most sensitive data point on our syllabus: how these shifting structures impact kids. And this is a heavy statistical punch. Children born to cohabiting parents experience approximately 3 times as many family transitions as kids born to married couples. 3 times. Having a baby during a cohabitation period just doesn't seem to stabilize the relationship in the same way that a child typically stabilizes a marriage against divorce.
So the crucial point is this. Because only about 13.5% of cohabiting expectant mothers go on to marry before the birth, the resulting family structure tends to be highly unstable, and that instability trickles down. It leads to a higher likelihood of family poverty, a total lack of automatic legal supports, and statistically higher risks of health, social, and academic struggles for the children involved.
To add a little nuance, though, we have to talk about the cohabitation effect. Historically, sociologists noted that living together before marriage actually predicted higher divorce rates later on. But the data is shifting. For couples married since the 1990s, this negative effect has significantly weakened. As cohabitation just becomes a widely accepted norm, especially for older couples or those already engaged, it simply doesn't carry the same red flag for future marital failure that it used to.
Finally, Section 5, Same-Sex Family Construction.
We've talked a lot about heterosexual trends, but we have to look at how families are being purposefully redesigned outside of those traditional frameworks, and this brilliantly illustrates that demographic reality. Out of the nearly 1 million same-sex cohabiting households in the U.S., 23% of female couples and 9.3% of male couples are actively raising kids. The data also shows that same-sex couples, on average, are more likely to be interracial and hold college degrees compared to their heterosexual counterparts.
When researchers compare same-sex and heterosexual couples, it's super interesting. They experience the exact same daily stressors, arguments over money, housework, power dynamics. Yet same-sex couples often report overall higher levels of relationship quality. Sociologists attribute this to an immense emphasis placed on relationship fairness and egalitarian roles, even while acknowledging they technically face fewer societal barriers to just ending the relationship if they wanted to.
Ultimately, what we are seeing is this profound, truly beautiful broadening of the very definition of family. Gay and lesbian individuals are actively constructing families of choice. They're blending their biological families with incredibly supportive friend networks into these cohesive, functional fabric. It's a completely conscious, intentional redesign of the social safety net to ensure people are actually there for you when it really counts.
Which brings us to the end of today's explainer, and I want to leave you with a critical question to ponder. As the data clearly shows us blurring these lines between singlehood, cohabitation, and marriage, how will our society, our laws, and our culture adapt to fully support the modern families we actively choose rather than just the ones we inherit? It's a massive shift for sure, and one that is going to define human relationships for decades to come. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today.